Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. You know, it's a rainy, miserable January night. There are some in UKIP, of course, who would blame the weather on government policy. I'm not one of them, but we'll come to that in questions, I'm sure. And one of the things I'm really proudest of is this is a proper, genuine, voluntary political party. And my congratulations to UKIP here in Northwich for putting on a meeting that has filled this room to the rafters. It's something I reckon none of the other parties could do on a wet January night in Northwich. So my congratulations to all of you. And these are genuine public meetings. Whether you come along tonight because you're a committed UKIPper, that's marvellous. Whether you come along tonight and you're unsure, that's marvellous. Whether you come along tonight because you absolutely want to make sure that you really do hate me, you're also welcome. You're also welcome. Because we're the only party in British politics doing this now. We're the only party in British politics daring to hold public meetings, and I will have my say, and then you will have your say. And within reason, you can say and ask what you like. Now, before I go on, just to get a little bit of audience participation, could I see a show of hands from all of those in this room who are not members of UKIP? Goodness gracious me. Right, now would you lock that door and the one over there? Right, well that's absolutely, that says to me that 75% of you, are not the faithful that I'm speaking to, and it's absolutely great to see you. I wasn't in politics. I left school at 18, went straight into the City of London, dealt in the commodities business, dealing in copper, aluminium, that sort of thing. I'd never stood even for local council. I had no ambitions or aspirations to be in politics at all. And do you know something? Having spent 20 years in business and then coming into politics, I think makes me rather better qualified than the bunch of college kids that are running the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democratic Party. I mean, they've all got the same backgrounds, haven't they? They all come from extreme privilege, they all go to good schools, they all go to Oxford, they all do PPE, and they all at the age of 23 become researchers. They're members of Parliament by the time they're 28, they've never had a job, they've never worked in the real world, they have no understanding or connection with the thoughts, hopes and aspirations of ordinary British families. There is a massive disconnect. And to make it worse, they look the same, they sound the same, and in terms of policy, frankly, you can barely put a cigarette paper between them. The British press plays up the differences between these parties, but if you really boil it down, the differences are very small indeed. And I say that because we're not a party of single-issue obsessives, but the fact, ladies and gentlemen, is that membership of this European Union, and there are some in this room, of course, who will have voted in the referendum back in 1975. Anybody over the age of 58 have a chance to vote in that referendum? One or two of you I can see do qualify. Many of us, of course, were far too young. But what you voted for was for us to stay part of a common market, not to be part of an organisation that now makes 75% of our laws. To be part of an organisation that says we cannot decide what light bulbs to put in our houses, what weed killer to use in our drives. We can't decide how we run our financial services industry. We can't actually decide sensibly how we run our energy industry. All our employment legislation, all our health and safety at work legislation. And I'm not advocating sending kids back up chimneys, but I do think the fact that it needs 3 men to hold the ladder whilst one climbs up it suggests we might have taken this stuff a bit too far. And on all of these levels, there is nothing these guys can do about it. And for years and years and years, it was very difficult to put the Eurosceptic case and to make people understand. But now I believe that anybody that's involved in business, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, knows and understands Who wins the next general election, frankly, is irrelevant to their business. But there's an even bigger issue that I think has brought home to the British people the sheer level of impotence of the British government in governing and controlling these islands. Because what could be a more fundamental point of whether you are a self-governing nation than the whole question of deciding who should come to live, work and settle in our islands? Yes, I'm talking about immigration. The debate we're not supposed to have. Because it isn't polite, is it? We might frighten the horses, not in front of the children. The only people that discuss immigration are the extremists. Well, we have discussed immigration, openly and clearly and fairly. And let me just say to everybody in this room, if you've come along tonight expecting to hear some sort of anti-foreigner rant, you're not going to get it. Because we're not anti-European. We don't dislike Europeans, and we don't dislike Europe. It may shock some of you to know that I am actually married to a girl from Hamburg. All right? So no one needs to tell me about the dangers of living in a German-dominated household. All right? We love Europe, but we want a Europe of different nation states trading together, cooperating together, being friends together, trying to be good next-door neighbours with each other, though recognising with the French that won't necessarily be possible. But not a Europe that has a flag, an anthem, and a president called Herman Van Rompuy. That is not something we want. And one of the main consequences of it is that we now have a total open door, an unrestricted door, to migration from very poor countries in Eastern Europe. You know, the minimum wage in Romania is about 10% of what it is here. And if I was a young guy living in Bucharest, I'd come to England. I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Do you know, if you're a young guy that's got a wife and 2 kids in Bucharest, and you come to work in England, within 3 months, you will qualify for child benefit for those kids, despite the fact they've never left Romania. And the child benefit alone will be more than you can earn working in a low-paid job in Bucharest. So I don't want to scapegoat Romanians, Bulgarians, or Poles, or anybody. I want to scapegoat the gutless political establishment in this country that has allowed a situation to exist where youth unemployment in this country has doubled since 2004, and where skilled and semi-skilled men and women have seen wage compression so that many of them are taking home less pay than they were 10 years ago. I'm scapegoating these gutless people that call themselves our leaders, based in Westminster, and not anybody of foreign extraction. All right? And I want us, going on into the future, to be a country that is open and welcoming to people from foreign lands. But I want immigrants who come to this country to actually operate on the same basis as Australia does. They've got this right. Australia have got this right. Australia says, we welcome immigration to this country under our control, and we want men and women who've got skills and who will benefit our society to come to Australia. But we don't want people to come to Australia if they've got a serious criminal record, which is funny really, because it used to be a prerequisite, didn't it? Well, having smashes in the cricket, I've got to get my own back somehow. Although not today, I'm pleased to say. You know, we don't want people with life-threatening diseases. And John Howard, when he was Prime Minister, said something that I think sums up the way many of us feel. He said, we don't care what colour you are, we don't care what religion you are, we don't care what country you came from, but if you come to live and settle in Australia, you will become Australian and become part of our community and part of our dream. Isn't that the vision we want for a united Britain where we can live and work together? And I think, that is the issue above all that has really made the great mass of the British public realise the extent to which we're not governing our own country. Now, of course, one of the consequences of mass open-door immigration has been a population rise, the likes of which we've never seen in modern times in these islands. And that has put massive, massive pressure on something that I care about, very much indeed, which is England's green and pleasant land. I say that because I still live in the same village in which I was born. I live on the North Downs of Kent, just south of London. We are prime greenbelt territory. It's still a lovely place to live, and yet I can be in Westminster within the hour. But the kind of pressures that we're facing are the kind of pressures that you're facing here in Cheshire too. And the problem is partly that we have an exploding population. But the other problem is that the big developers have just the most massive influence with our political class at Westminster. And if you're a developer, you don't want to build and develop some grubby old brownfield site because it's jolly expensive. You've got to clean it up and detoxify it. Now what you want as a developer is a nice little bit of greenbelt. And it was always thought in the past that it would be the Labour Party that would build houses in vast numbers, but the Conservative Party that would protect rural England and greenbelt. And what we've learned from this Conservative government is that, frankly, they're in bed with the developers, and Nick Bowles, the Development Minister, has made it clear he wants as much building to take place on greenbelt land as is possible. And I have to say, we don't need to do that. Do you realise there are 750,000 empty properties in Britain's big cities? Wouldn't it make more sense to provide social housing for British people that need it in those empty flats above shops in British towns and cities, and to save the green belt and to protect England's green and pleasant land? Wouldn't that make more sense? And perhaps, just perhaps, the penny is starting to drop on another of these great political follies, and one that our EU membership has compounded and made much worse. And I'm talking about the whole issue of global warming. Remember 20 years ago? We'd had the miners' strike, we'd reduced the number of pits in Britain by 2/3, and yet they'd become so efficient they were producing the same amount of coal we had before we closed 2/3 of the pits. We have one of the most efficient and modern, brilliant coal mining industries in the whole of the Western world. And Michael Heseltine, and I don't generally get personal about other politicians, well I did with Herman Van Rompuy once, but no, I don't generally get personal, but I do reserve, I must say, a particular hostility for the arrogance of Mr. Heseltine. Mr. Heseltine was an early convert to the idea that carbon dioxide emissions were leading to global warming and would destroy humanity. And so he closed down the British coal mining industry. And that was the beginning of this great folly that the Labour, Lib Dems and Conservatives have all run headlong into. And as a result of our membership of the European Union, we have decided that by the year 2020, we will produce 20% of our energy from renewable sources. It sounds, in a way, rather nice and cuddly, doesn't it? But the reality is that what we're doing is we are building thousands, we have built and we are building thousands of onshore and offshore wind turbines, because this apparently is going to guarantee our electricity supply for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, it is one of the most ugly, expensive mistakes we have ever made in this country. And even if you were worried that CO2 emissions will lead into global warming, understand this. This country only produces 2.5% of the world's CO2 output. And even if this is a problem, given that India and China between them are building 4 new coal-fired power stations every week, what on earth are we doing building wind technology, loading what will be by 2020 up to 20% on the electricity price of every consumer bill, and doing something to British manufacturing industry which is nothing short of disastrous? You see, as we've gone down this route, those in the world that are rather brighter than us and don't do what European Commissioners tell them have gone the other way. The Chinese and the Indians are going for coal in a massive way. The Americans have gone for shale gas in a massive way. So right at the very moment when our industrial competitors have gone for cheap energy, we have gone for expensive energy. So is it any wonder that both the aluminium smelters in this country have closed in the last few years? Is it any wonder that almost all of our steel production has gone overseas? And it's not until you go and visit a manufacturing plant that you actually understand how much power manufacturing needs. You know, the INEOS plant in Runcorn uses more electricity than the whole of the city of Liverpool. It's stunning, isn't it? But it makes you realise just how important cheap energy is if we want Britain to be a successful manufacturing economy. And I have to say that what we stand for in UKIP is not environmental vandalism, is not irresponsibility, but frankly, we think these climate change targets should be scrapped. They should be scrapped because, as I say, all the while India and China are building 4 new coal-fired power stations every week, why on earth should we unilaterally commit industrial harry-carry? It doesn't make any sense. So we are committed as a party to stopping this ludicrous wind energy project. Oh, and by the way, did you know that Ed Miliband's wife earns her living as a lawyer working in environmental affairs? So her job is to push through wind farm applications. That Miriam Clegg was for some years a director of the largest Spanish wind farm energy company. Oh, and I almost forgot. David Cameron's father-in-law gets paid £1,000 a day just for having wind turbines sited on his estate in North Lincolnshire. It represents a massive transfer of wealth in Britain from poor people to rich people. The wretched things don't work when the wind doesn't blow, and they have to be switched off when the wind blows too much. And because of that lack of reliability, you have to have 100% backup. And we're told that possibly by the year 2015, the lights could go out. But can you imagine that? The lights could go out. Now, I just about remember the power strikes back in the 1970s, and they were rather fun, really. Surely a good excuse not to do homework, I must say. But now we're living in a computer and technology-driven world. Can you imagine what the implications would be for this country in terms of its trade and its economy if we lose power? And yet our political class are so gutless and useless and supine that in terms of meeting these ridiculous targets, they're leaving us exposed to possibly the lights going out in 2015. And I think that what we represent in UKIP is a group of people who've come together from all walks of life. I regard myself as a hard-nosed pragmatist, not frightened of addressing real issues. And I think that's why this party has started to take off. We've started to take off because there is a collective loss of confidence in our political class in Westminster. We've started to take off because many people can see that some of the big calls and predictions that UKIP have made have come true. We've started to take off because people actually rather like the fact that we're not afraid to say what we think. We've got a sense of humour. Yeah, sure. There may be the odd rough edge to UKIP, but isn't it better to have the odd rough edge than what we've got, this highly polished machine that doesn't actually say or do anything? And I think we're taking off because no longer will you come to a UKIP meeting and hear me or anybody else telling you how blooming awful Europe is and how awful everything is. We're talking about solutions. We're talking about cheap energy. We're talking about deregulating our industries and giving manufacturing a chance. We're talking also about addressing the problem in this country of social mobility. I mean, how can it be right that the 7% of people who go to the private schools in Britain are now dominating industry, business, commerce, the media, and even over 50% of our gold medal winners in the Olympics went to those 7% of people? The class system in Britain actually is widening and deepening with every year that goes by, and there are tens of thousands of very, very bright children, boys and girls, who are not achieving their best. Do you know, in the mid-1960s, 50% of the youngsters that went to Oxford and Cambridge came from what would be called working class backgrounds, right? That figure is now 11%. And what that means, folks, is that we are wasting some of the best, brightest and most brilliant talent in this country by not giving them the educational opportunities that they need to succeed. And my view, and the view of our party, is that one of the most wanton acts of social destruction in this country was the abolition of the grammar schools in the 1960s and the 1970s. And let's bring back selection and give our bright kids... So again, it's UKIP being positive and not being negative. Now, we've had one or two big successes. By-elections in which we've surprised everybody, and a set of English county council elections on May the 2nd last year that I have to say stunned everybody, including me. You know, the fact we got nearly a quarter of the vote. But in just a few months from now, we've got, I think, a very big opportunity. We've got the European elections taking place on May the 22nd this year. The last time they were contested in 2009, we stunned the establishment by coming second and beating Gordon Brown's governing Labour Party of the day. I mean, that really did feel very good, I must say. The Tories won those elections in 2009, with their leader David Cameron campaigning on the fact that he'd given the British people a cast iron guarantee. Do you remember that? Yeah. Cast iron guarantee that if he became Prime Minister, there would be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And he wonders why we don't believe in this time, Mr. Chairman. I really do think that we have got the possibility to bring together voters, Conservative voters, old Labour voters, Lib Dem voters, non-voters, young and old, and right across the spectrum. I believe UKIP has the opportunity on May the 22nd to cause an earthquake in British politics by winning those elections. I really do. If we do that, everything will change. If we do that, the position of David Cameron as Prime Minister will be open to doubt. Certainly the position of Nick Clegg as leader of the Liberal Democrats will be open to doubt. The ability of Miliband to look like a clear winner next year would also be in doubt. But perhaps more significantly, if we do well in those elections, and equally well in the local elections that are being fought on that day, we will then be able to go into 2015 with the realistic chance of getting a serious number of UKIP MPs elected into Westminster. And my ambition and my aim is that we should be in the position in 2015 that Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats were in 2010. That we be in that position where we hold the balance of power. And I promise you one thing, folks, when we get to that position, there will be a referendum, and we will decide our future, and we will take our country back. Well, that's the easy bit. You see, I've told you now what I'm going to do and what we're going to do. But I now want to ask you, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So, well, vote UKIP as a start set. That is a starter for 10, and I like that. But is that all you can do for me? Couldn't you do a bit more for me? I mean, couldn't you take a few leaflets down the pub and talk to your mates? Well, there we are. I'll come with you, no problem at all. Got to do market research, you know. What I'm saying to you is this. You know, for those of you that come along tonight, having never been to a UKIP meeting before, if you leave here tonight satisfied with what you've heard, satisfied with the questions that you're about to ask us, if you leave here believing that we are trying genuinely to take back our country, trying to hand on to our children and grandchildren the freedoms that those that went before us actually fought and died for in many cases so that we could have. If you leave here tonight believing in those things and believing that we are a sincere group of people that are not doing this for career, we're doing this for our country, then really my challenge is to you, what are you going to do? Because this is a volunteer army, and I'm asking you to join us, to give us a few bob, to put posters up on your walls or windows, to try and encourage other people to come and support us. You know, this idea that really started with Blair, that all politics could be decided by the soundbite on the television, is rubbish. Real politics happens locally. Real politics happens round the family kitchen table. Real politics happens in the golf club, in the bridge club, in the Women's Institute. Real politics happens where people get together and talk to each other. And real politics comes when people say to their friends and their mates and their family, listen, I've met these UKIP people, I believe in them, they are trying to change this country for good. So my challenge to all of you here who have not yet committed, I almost said converted, but I'm not Billy Graham, all right? But my challenge to you who have not yet committed is if you leave here tonight satisfied, then please, 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 lend us a hand, because all it needs, you know, is a couple of 100,000 of us around this country to get together and fight for what we believe in, and we will get it. Thank you.